Hello and welcome to Firstpost Live, where we bring you the day's top 4 stories from across the world. I am Joshua Barnes, live from the Firstpost studios. Let's begin with the headlines. The Indian rupee slips to a record low of 90.47 against the US dollar, deepening its fall past the 90 per dollar mark, as the lack of a trade deal with Washington continues to weigh on sentiment. Japan holds joint air drills with the United States, days after Chinese and Russian bombers circled the region, as Tokyo warns of a worsening security environment. Bangladesh's Election Commission will announce the date for February's parliamentary polls, the first national vote since a student uprising ousted former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina in 2024. Elon Musk says his months-long cost-cutting stint at the US government's Doge office was a little bit successful, though he admits it pulled focus from his companies. And Iceland becomes the 5th country to boycott next year's Eurovision, after Israel was cleared to compete amid ongoing criticism over the war in Gaza. Today, we begin with a major move by the US Federal Reserve. For the 3rd time this year, America's central bank has cut interest rates. But behind the headline lies a story of deep disagreements, rising pressure, and a difficult path ahead for the world's largest economy. Let's break it down. The Federal Reserve lowered its key lending rate by 0.25 percentage points, bringing it to a range of 3.50% to 3.75%, the lowest level in 3 years. This rate influences how expensive or cheap loans become for consumers and businesses, affecting everything from home loans to credit card bills. The goal of lowering rates is simple: make borrowing cheaper, encourage spending, and support jobs. But the decision wasn't smooth. For the first time in months, 3 Fed officials openly disagreed with the rate cut, featuring hawkish and dovish dissent. Now, in Fed parlance, hawks are generally more concerned about inflation and favour higher rates. On the other hand, doves focus on supporting the labour market and want lower rates. Fed Chair Jerome Powell admitted the central bank is in a very challenging situation.
The situation is that our 2 goals are a bit in tension, right? So, interestingly, everyone around the table at the FOMC agrees that inflation is too high and that we want it to come down, and agrees that the labor market has softened and that there's further risk. Everyone agrees on that. Where the difference is how do you weight those risks, and what does your forecast look like, and where do you, ultimately where do you think the bigger risk is?
And the Fed chair also blamed President Trump's tariffs for high inflation in the country.
If you get away from tariffs, inflation is in the low 2s, right? So it's really tariffs that's causing the most of the inflation overshoot. And we do think of those as likely to, in the current situation, as likely to be a one-time price increase. Our job is to make sure that it is, and we will do that job. But right now, you've got this difficult balance, and there are risks to both sides. There's no risk-free path.
Now, the Fed's latest projections suggest only 1 rate cut next year. And could that even change if new data shows a shift in the economy? The next big decision will come at the Fed's January meeting. But those hoping for aggressive rate cuts, especially President Donald Trump, who has repeatedly pushed for them, may have to wait. After the rate cut was announced, President Trump, who is expected to pick Powell's replacement soon, expressed disappointment.
But we should be able to do a lot better than 3 and 4. We're scheduled to be at 4%, which is pretty amazing because we have a deadhead Fed hair. I mean, this guy, the head of the Federal Reserve, is a stiff, and you fight that. It's amazing. We fight that, and yet interest rates are going down, except with him, not too much. He did a rather, I would say, a rather small number that could have been doubled, at least doubled.
And global markets responded instantly to the decision. In the US, the Dow Jones jumped 500 points before closing. But moving east, the mood in the market shifted. Across Asia, most markets were trading in red. Hong Kong, Seoul, Japan and Shanghai all traded lower. But Indian benchmark indices Sensex and Nifty opened in the green. Analysts say the drops were led by lower expectations for further rate cuts in 2026 and Oracle's disappointing earnings. They say the rate cut was not needed this time because the job market has not fallen apart completely.
So the job market is not falling apart. The JOLTS numbers, the available jobs actually went up. The employment cost index indicates that people are getting paid, and we've had really robust retail sales. So I can make an argument there wasn't a need for a cut, but many will tell you that they're trying to normalize the yield curve and really help banks, particularly smaller banks and small businesses.
This rate comes at a tricky time. A long US government shutdown earlier this year created a data blackout, leaving officials with less information than usual. It comes as monetary policymakers are trying to support the jobs market, which has been showing signs of weakness for much of the year. Meanwhile, inflation remains above the Fed's 2% target. So, where does this leave the world's most influential central bank? The Fed has delivered 3 cuts this year, but deeper divisions inside the institution are making future moves less predictable. Inflation is cooling, but not enough. Jobs are weakening, but not collapsing. For now, Americans and global markets will have to wait for January to see what happens next. Moving on, as India-US ties enter a phase of uncertainty under President Donald Trump, lawmakers in Washington, D.C. have sent out an important message. It's that the US-India relationship is too important to mishandle. At a Congress hearing in South and Central Asia, lawmakers said that recent tariffs and immigration restrictions are backfiring. They warned that the measures are weakening US ties with New Delhi at a time when China and Russia are reshaping the Indo-Pacific. Democrats have sharply criticized the 50% tariff on Indian goods, saying it has derailed high-level engagement and pushed India away. At one point, a Democrat lawmaker held up a photo of Prime Minister Narendra Modi with President Vladimir Putin, calling it a symbol of Trump's failed foreign policy. The photo also showed PM Modi with Chinese leader Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin at SCO summit earlier this year. With this, the lawmaker said Trump's approach is undermining decades of progress in India-US relations.
When Trump took office at the beginning of this year, the Biden administration handed him a bilateral relationship at the height of its strength, a revitalized Quad, a budding defense tech partnership, and a trusted supply chain partner. These were hard-earned accomplishments and the product of strategic discipline from our 2 countries. And then what happened? Flush, flush, flush down the toilet. The capital that Americans have built over decades in service of Trump's personal grievances and at the expense of our national interests. And unless he changes course, Trump will be the American president that lost India, or more accurately, that chased India away, while revitalizing the Russian Empire, while breaking up the transatlantic alliance and menacing Latin America.
Democrats also targeted the $100,000 fee on H-1B visas for high-skilled immigrants, about 2/3 of whom have been Indian citizens in recent years. They argued it weakens people-to-people ties and hurts sectors that depend on Indian talent.
Beyond tariffs, Trump has also attacked the people-to-people ties between the U.S. and India. The $100,000 fee on H-1B visas, 70% of which are held by Indians, is a rebuke of the incredible contributions Indians have made to science, technology, medicine, and arts in the United States.
Questions on Russia, China, and India's global role dominated the hearing. Republicans and Democrats said that the India-US partnership is now a defining relationship of the 21st century. And the subcommittee chair from Trump's own Republican Party said India is key to securing a free and open Indo-Pacific. He pointed to strong defense ties, joint naval drills, and growing technology cooperation. Another Republican lawmaker called for decoupling pharmaceutical supply chains from China and instead should elevate partnerships with India in that sector. The lawmakers stressed that India is essential on defence, technology, energy and other emerging sectors. They noted that India is reducing its dependence on Russian energy and pushing back against Chinese aggression along the border. In the end, the message was unified. US lawmakers said the tariffs are hurting US interests and risking a critical partnership. They urged a reset to restore trust and keep India close at a time of global realignment. Our next story is from Africa. The conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo is escalating. The M23 rebels captured Uvira on Wednesday. It is a key town in eastern DR Congo. Rwanda has long been accused of backing the M23 rebels. The capture of Uvira came barely a week after DRC and Rwanda signed a peace deal in Washington. US President Donald Trump hailed the agreement as a miracle, but the truce deal seems to be in tatters now. Burundi, which neighbours both the DRC and Rwanda, has called the truce deal's failure a slap in the face of the US. Burundi has backed the Congolese army to counter M23 rebels, and it sees the capture of Uvira as an existential threat. Uvira is just 20 kilometres away from the Burundian economic capital. In response to M23's rapid advances, Burundi has closed its main border ports with the DRC. Reportedly, the border posts are now being considered as military zones. Yesterday, Rwanda accused both the DRC and Burundi of violating the Trump-brokered peace deal. Just the day before that, the US and European powers urged the rebels to immediately halt their offensive, while also asking Rwanda to pull its troops out of eastern DRC. But the conflict has shown no sign of slowing down. After the M23 rebels took control of Uvira, streets stayed empty, shops were shut, and soldiers fled the town. Several 100,000 residents of Uvira have been plunged into uncertainty over who is in charge now. The latest offensive comes less than a year after the M23 seized Goma and Bukavu, two provincial capitals in the mineral-rich eastern DRC. M23's latest advance is a new blow for the Congolese government. And with the fall of Uvira, the anger against President Felix Tshisekedi is also growing.
We are already used to the fact that the power in Kinshasa has never been able to contain even the war for a minute against the enemy. It's enough for the enemy to decide to advance, and they advance. So it doesn't surprise us. Rather, what amazes us is that the government of Felix Tshisekedi, Congo, has had the misfortune to have him at the helm because it's a government that has never agreed to change.
Reports suggest that more than 40,000 Congolese have fled the fighting and arrived in Burundi in a week. And over 200,000 people have been displaced within South Kivu province since December the 2nd. As the conflict in eastern DR Congo widens, it raises doubts over the Trump-brokered truce deal. The region has been plagued by 3 decades of deadly conflicts, and peace remains elusive. This remains a developing story, and we will keep bringing you the latest updates from the region. And our final story is from Saudi Arabia, where torrential rains have unleashed severe flooding across Jeddah. This has prompted Saudi authorities to issue a red alert. Roads turned into rivers, neighborhoods were submerged, and emergency crews are racing to rescue those stranded. The National Center for Meteorology reported that more than 179 millimeters of rain fell within just 6 hours. An extraordinary deluge compared with Jeddah's typical November average of just 23 millimeters and annual average of just 55.6 millimeters. The downpour caused widespread power outages, brought public transport to a halt, and left traffic gridlocked across the coastal city. At least 2 fatalities have been confirmed, with civil defense teams responding to multiple distress calls throughout the day. Authorities have urged residents to stay indoors and keep away from low-lying or flood-prone areas until conditions improve. Schools and universities in Jeddah, Rabigh and Kulais have been shifted to remote learning. As a result, the Education Department has suspended in-person classes in the interest of everyone's safety. The impact of the storm extended beyond Jeddah. Weather officials issued alerts for several regions. They warned residents to avoid unnecessary movement as heavy rains, strong winds and lightning continue. Even major events were not spared. The Red Sea International Film Festival was forced into an emergency shutdown. Rain began leaking through temporary structures at the festival. Organisers instructed global attendees to shelter in place, while the US consulate cancelled a high-profile gala scheduled for later in the day.
They started closing down the outdoor bit and covering the chairs with plastic because I guess they saw the forecasts. And then they closed here in the Culture Square and said you can't leave.
Light rainfall is usually rare in Jeddah. The historic port city typically receives less than 2 inches a year, making this week's extreme weather highly unusual. According to a new assessment, Saudi Arabia is witnessing a shift in its seasonal rainfall patterns, with peak rains now moving from November to December, reflecting evolving climate behaviour across the kingdom. As emergency crews continue operations, authorities are urging residents to follow official updates closely and remain cautious amid the ongoing storms. Well, that's all we have on the show for today. We will see you again tomorrow at the same time. Until then, thank you for watching.